Now, let's take this to the next level. I'm going to plop this in over here and move it up to where it was before. Now, let's turn off this layer that we've been playing on and deselect our box here and switch back to our tomatoes, for instance, because you probably noticed that there were a couple other options with our brush tool. And specifically, we have the pencil tool, which we're not really going to look at. It basically gives you the ability to draw straight lines like a pencil. But I want to look at the color replacement tool and the mixer brush tool. Okay, these are both very cool and tools that you would use on a very regular basis. So first, let's look at the color replacement tool. It triggers off of all of the brush presets. You can control the size, the hardness, the spacing, and all of that. What's really cool is that if I choose a color like the green here, whenever I paint, you'll notice that the settings here are a little bit different. We have mode options only of hue, saturation, color, and luminosity, and color is the default. But what's really cool is that it's a dedicated tool just for replacing color. So remember earlier how we made a copy of one of the tomatoes and shifted the color by hue. In this case, we can just use a brush and go in and paint over our tomato here. And right now I have a pretty hard edge. I can soften that quite a bit. And as I paint, it maintains all of the detail in the tomato. You'll notice, but it just shifts the color to whatever color I have chosen. And so the real advantage to using this is that it's a dedicated brush specifically for changing color. Now, you might think, well, that's kind of cool for tomatoes, but what other uses could I possibly think of? Well, let's say that you're working with a photograph of somebody wearing a certain color shirt and you want to change the color of that shirt. It would be very easy to do that using this tool. Okay, you can just go in and paint the area that you want to have adjusted and you're good. And you don't really have a lot of controls here with the brush. Okay, so the controls are somewhat more limited, but that is perfectly fine. I'm going to turn the pressure off here and I'm going to increase the size of this brush a little bit since I'm not currently using my tablet and I'm using the mouse. So now we have a softer edge. Okay, so I can just paint around this. Now, mind you, anything that you paint with this, it's going to be shifted to the green. So, you know, if you paint the stem, it's going to be adjusted to that particular shade of green. Whatever color you have in your foreground color, that's what it's going to be, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just want to make you aware of that because, you know, if you get sloppy in your painting, everything else that the brush touches is going to change as well. Like I just did by accident. You notice how that streak went up and everything in its path was changed. Okay. So you'll want to keep that in mind. And of course you can get very creative and have a lot of fun with it just by picking different colors. For instance, you could pick different shades of green, or like we could go to more like a teal. And again, everywhere you paint, it's going to shift it to that teal color. And it maintains all the detail, but it shifts the color. And this brush, by the way, because it's a dedicated brush, it does work differently than just using color replacement with the standard brush. Okay, so you want to keep that in mind. And I actually like working with this brush because of the flexibility that it has specifically for this task. Okay, now the other brush that I want to point out here before we close is the mixer brush tool. And the mixer brush tool is kind of cool because it actually gives you the ability to paint over top of your image, and it draws from the color. You can either have it load the brush, which means it's pulling color from the photo. You can work with a clean brush, or you can load solid colors from the foreground. And I'll show you really how it works. You'll notice, like, if I take this tomato here, let me zoom in on this tomato here a little bit. If I start painting, you notice that as I stroke down, the stroke is one color. If I stroke back, it's another color. Why is that? Because the brush is sampling from the colors underneath it to a certain extent. So like if I start at the bottom, it's pulling from this darker color and then slowly comes up from the top. Now, where this really plays in cool, and of course you can control how this interacts based on the wetness setting, how much of the color is loading onto the brush, and how much of the color is mixing with the underlying photograph. So where this really comes into play in a cool way is that you can use this brush to paint over top of a photograph to make a realistic looking painting. And no one would know that your source was actually the original photograph. And of course, you can also choose the different types of brushes again. Like we could switch to this brush here. Probably want to use a smaller version of it. And so I can pull color in, and it interacts. Again, it's the thing that's cool about this brush compared to the other brushes that we are working with is that it's pulling the color from the photograph itself. Okay? That's the big difference. So each of these brushes have unique qualities to them, and so you can use those to vary your end result. So you notice here this brush is a lot smaller, but we could use it to add some pretty cool details. And if I was using my tablet, we would be able to extend some of my end results here even more so in some pretty cool ways. So very powerful option, and that is the mixer brush tool. So that's all we have for the brush tool. We covered a lot. I would really encourage you to get in there and experiment with the different brushes and see what they can do. You may end up discovering some pretty cool new ways of working with your photographs and with digital images that you hadn't considered before.